Howdy folks. No Man's Sky's lore is nearly as vast as its procedural universe, which can make it pretty daunting to dive into for players both old and new. Since y'all enjoyed my last lore video on some of the creepiest fates in the universe, I thought, hey, no one's done a video on the cults of the universe yet, so let's fix that. I'm Kanaju, and these are the cults of No Man's Sky that I know of. Now, it should go without saying that I'm only covering canon cults in this video. I apologize to any actual cults that may exist within No Man's Sky's player community, but this video isn't about you. Also, please note that this list is in no particular order that you know of. Minor spoilers about background lore and Expedition 4 to follow. Number 1. Cult of the Worm. Let's begin with the cult at the center of Expedition 4 Emergence. The Titan sandworms found across the galaxy are certainly a sight that has inspired many a traveler over the years, so it's little wonder that Vy'keen would feel just as inspired by the sight. However, this particular group of Vy'keen developed a rather unique obsession with the creatures. In order to learn more, we actually have two sets of documents that we can examine. These shine light on both the cult's beliefs as well as the behaviors of Titan sandworms. Let's begin by reading a couple passages from the Writhing manuscript in order to learn about how this religion began. It reads, "We heard them before we saw them, felt them before we heard them. The children were the first to notice, running home with tails of earth moving under their toes, a thump, 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 thundering deep below the sand. I doubted, we all did, until the day of the great storm. As the first heavy raindrops hit the dust, the rumbling deepened. Everyone heard it. Something huge was shifting beneath the surface of the planet." Before I go on, can I just say it would be really cool to have rare rainstorms on desert planets, especially if they cause certain plants to sprout or buried animals to surface? Sort of like how storm crystals only activate during storms. Just an idea, I think that'd be cool. Okay, back to the manuscript. "See," cried our children in brief triumph before hiding fearful faces. "We were all afraid, but when the first worm breached the surface, we couldn't look away. It was breathtaking. So colossal was the beast that it cast our whole settlement into darkness, splitting the sky like black lightning as it leapt overhead. Worm by worm, they rose from the desert, a few at first, then dozens, bursting from the ground and diving back below, migrating." So this is an account of the cult's first interaction with the Titan worms. A desert rainstorm attracted dozens of worms to the surface, inspiring awe as they passed. So far, this seems like a pretty fair thing to worship as far as cults go. However, the practices that developed are a little stranger. The manuscript continues. "The ingestion cycle has been tradition for as long as anyone can remember. There are no requirements to become a sacrifice, no restrictions of status or age. We are all equal under the great worms. Anyone may enter the maw. Every storm season, we each hope to be chosen. We arrange ourselves in lines across the desert, arms lifted to the sky." How's that for a visual? So, from this manuscript, we can see that these Vy'keen offer themselves as sacrifices to the great worms. This isn't some form of appeasement or prayer, though. Rather, these Vy'keen believe that by being ingested by one of these worms, they will be reborn as one themselves, in a sense becoming like a god, powerful and free. A more personal account by a single cult member can be found in the Wormskin folios. These living documents are described as ancient, leaving the current status of the cult a little more ambiguous. Whereas the Writhing manuscript gives us an account of the cult's beginnings and practices, the Wormskin folios give us personal insight into those beliefs. The first folio reads, "The Worm Lord towers above the dusty earth. Its flesh becomes the sky. Our pathetic shells cannot follow, cannot reach its height, cannot reach its depths. We offer ourselves to the ground. We beg our sacrifice accepted." So this is pretty similar to what we read in the Writhing manuscript. However, this is clearly written from the perspective of a specific individual. Let's see what the second folio says. "The dust was choking. Our eyes reddened and watered, but the truth was inescapable. The vein of the Atlas had surfaced." This passage is pretty evocative in its imagery, both the description of the choking dust and the Titan worm as being a vein of the Atlas. So these people seem to understand the Atlas as being the universal deity, but the Titan worms are its veins. It's an interesting interpretation. It implies that the worms aren't an invasive species spreading across the galaxy, but rather an extension, or manifestation, of the Atlas's will upon the universe. This would be an interesting topic to explore, especially in respect to the end of the Expedition 4, but we have a few more cults to cover in the video, so let's get through the rest of these wormskin folios. Now, with every storm, we beg to be chosen, arms to the sky, faces to the dirt, calling out with all we have. When heavy raindrops hit the earth, the veins of Atlas answer. The rapture of our consumption is beyond words. We tumble as it swallows, but grip the slick walls as best we can. Oh, to reach the gizzard still awake. Breathe it deeply, how our lungs gurgle. The slime clogs our noses and stings our eyes. Though in this warm darkness, we are already blind. For those unfamiliar with the term, a gizzard is like a stomach. However, instead of solely relying on acids to digest food like our stomachs, a gizzard uses muscles to sort of grind up food. Imagine a worm swallowing a bunch of dirt and rock and maybe a Vy'keen or two, and then using the muscles of its gizzard and the grit of the rocks it swallowed to grind those Vy'keen down into a more digestible state. Sounds horrible, to be honest. So does the drowning on the slime beforehand. Terrible all around. I mention this because the cultists seem to be totally aware of the fate that awaits them, and yet they sacrifice themselves nonetheless. Let's read the last wormskin folio for a little more insight as to why this is. Curse the agony of regurgitation. Curse this feeble flesh that still confines me. My brethren were reborn, rising from the blessed dust as fresh tendrils, glistening capillaries to the great veins, slithering away into the sand. I will be patient until the next storm. So it looks like this Vy'keen lived to tell the tale, regurgitated after being swallowed. Meanwhile, according to their beliefs, the Vy'keen who were swallowed were reborn as quote-unquote fresh tendrils, like these, destined to grow ever larger. Unless I bump into them first, of course. Number 2, the Voice of Freedom. The Voice of Freedom isn't so much a cult as a philosophy. And no, they haven't brainwashed me just because I'm wearing the Shroud of Freedom. Don't be ridiculous. So, what is the Voice of Freedom? I think one of the members that initiated me said it best. The voice is not one voice, but many. It is our voice. It is your voice. You sing with our choir now. Unlike pirates of the Blight, who are famously obsessed with treasure and loot, the Voice of Freedom is a group of mischievous murderers and martyrs who openly oppose the Atlas. They seem to believe that the Atlas is not only oppressive, but a deceiver as well. The specifics of these beliefs aren't known, but conversing with another member seems to imply that this might have something to do with the Sentinels, which are in fact an oppressive force. However, while the Korvax widely believe the Sentinels to be servants of the Atlas, let's just say it's not so black and white. Another member told me, quote, "The Crimson Fiend corrupts minds across the galaxy. No more will we prostrate ourselves before its all-seeing red eye. To speak with the Voice of Freedom is to roar back against the Crimson Void." While the Atlas certainly has the capability to corrupt minds, and it certainly might in a manner of speaking, it's really not known for this outside of the Voice of Freedom. This member also refers to the Atlas as the Crimson Void. Interesting, considering there is an entity known as the Abyss, Abyss, Void, actively corrupting minds around the universe. I won't say more for fear of spoilers, but it's possible this group's actual enemy might actually be the Abyss, and they don't even know it. Or, of course, it's possible the Atlas does get up to a lot of bad stuff when I'm not looking. Or a combination of the two. Man, there's a lot of lore in this game, but we have to keep moving. Number 3, Cult of Nal. In order to fully understand the Cult of Nal, we need to cover the entire history of the main Vy'keen religion, the tale of two battle brothers, Herc and Nal. But in the interest of time, I'll summarize it quickly. Very quickly. So, back in the day, the Vy'keen were as afraid of the Sentinels as everyone else. Well, not quite. They wanted to fight them, but they sought guidance from the great monolith first. Herc the Great confronted the monolith and was eventually given the decree to aid the travelers when they appeared. However, it didn't comment on the Sentinels, so Herc went ahead and proclaimed war on the Sentinels, which pretty much everyone cheered for. Almost. I'll let this excerpt from the Saga of the Vy'keen explain what happened next. As Herc stood upon the sacred mountain, Nal climbed to its peak, and there, with fist outstretched, challenged Herc. "Fool!" Nal cried. "The Sentinels cannot be vanquished." Herc, with furious rage, struck the fool from the mountain. For 3 moons and suns, Nal fell before being claimed by doom. Pretty dramatic stuff, but Nal's story doesn't end there. It continues. Herc's rage against the upstart Nal inflamed the hearts of Nal's followers, who, upon their leader's demise, felt the blood of the ancestors rise within them. The Vy'keen nations were bathed in righteous war for 66 moons. On the 66th moon, the war cry of the Vy'keen of Nal was silenced. After surveying their bodies, Herc gazed unto the heavens, and there beheld a great sentinel host descending upon the Vy'keen. The great Vy'keen Sentinel War was at hand. Now, it should be noted that the Vy'keen did in fact win this war, somehow, but I'll return to that in a later entry. The important thing is that while most of Nal's followers were killed in this initial war, many survived throughout the galaxy. I've met a few myself. In fact, my settlement is actually named the Oasis of Nal, founded to escape the Vy'keen Inquisition, which hunts, tortures, and executes followers of Nal. Well, all of this is fascinating enough. Just wait until you find out there's a final testament of Nal. It reads, "Know that I heard the word of the Atlas, where Herc heard nothing. In their rage, in their impotent jealousy, Herc struck me from the mountain, and I saw the truth of what the monolith had said, that my end would be an awakening, that in this dream nothing should perish, or so it would be until the coming of the last traveler. So it would be until the destruction of realities. Know this, the final testament of Nal." That's right. Nal was able to comment on their own death. It's complicated, like rabbit hole complicated. Instead, we're gonna leave that where it is and look at a piece of cult propaganda that can be found in hacked Vy'keen archives. Tell me, friends, have you heard the testament of Nal? Nal is not dead. They heard what Herc could not. They live still at the right hand of the god. They encourage us to show how we care, that we will not leave the Atlas light, that devotion will never fade. Only through this is oblivion spared. Only through this will we be ready. So, the Cult of Nal isn't just a faction of Vy'keen who disapprove of Herc the Great, but many of them believe Nal was able to cheat death, and in following their example, you too can escape your fate. So, who's telling the truth, Herc or Nal? Does Nal really live at the right hand of the god? Sounds like a topic for another video, if you're interested, that is. But for now, number 4, Devotees of the Atlas. This is less occult and more religion, I suppose, given how many beings worship the Atlas in this universe. However, the Devotees of the Atlas are mentioned specifically during a weekend mission that took place in August 2020. Take a listen. Devotees of the Atlas came to this world to pray, once. An anomaly distorts their crashed vessel. It claimed the lives of those within long ago. So after you clear the anomaly, we get a glimpse of the Devotees' beliefs. Its log speaks of the Atlas who made all things, even loss, even hate. I wonder if, in their final moments, they trusted in their deity, if they hoped for salvation. Nothing groundbreaking, I admit, but I find it interesting that this group seemed to have a pretty good idea of the actual power of the Atlas, and what it was actually capable of. But, not much else to say on this group. Number 5, Followers of the Abyss. So this is another group that the Traveler comes across during one of 2020's weekend missions. This time, though, it's a Gek cult. Upon reaching the corrupted monolith, you're greeted with the following info. A transmission emanates from the corrupted structure. Between the screams of Gek cultists, one word is clear, again and again. It demands sacrifice. It demands materials. Abyss. The cult was unable to feed its master. My services demanded instead. I must bring resources here. For those of you who didn't take part in these original narrative-based weekend missions, we were essentially cleaning up the damage of the Abyss as it crossed the galaxy. This was accomplished by supplying these anomalies with specific materials. After clearing this one, we get the following text. The transmission is changed with the collapse of the anomaly. Instead, Gek voices speak of gratitude and friendship. They tell me that this world could be a home for me, that I should stay, that the water is perfectly safe to drink. They tell me they've been so lonely. Now, I hope I don't need to tell you, but don't drink the water. Number 6. Gek Last Spawn. If you enjoyed my speed run of Vy'keen lore a minute ago, just wait until you hear my speed run of Gek lore. Remember, this is just a simple summary. This video is long enough. So, remember that Vy'keen Sentinel War I told you about? The one where the Vy'keen somehow won? Well, this had an unintended effect on the rest of the galaxy. The war left both the Sentinels and the Vy'keen weakened. This left the galaxy vulnerable to conquest, which is exactly what the Gek First Spawn did. The First Spawn were the dominant members of the Gek race, known for their brutality and strength. With the Sentinels being all but useless at this point, they subjugated countless systems. They eventually destroyed Korvax Prime, the sentient home planet of the Korvax, and they harvested the remains for resources and enslaved the remaining Korvax. Long story short, countless Korvax sacrificed themselves, allowing their nanite clusters to fill the spawning pools on the First Spawn homeworld. This reprogrammed the embryos at a genetic level, making the next generation of First Spawn into traitors rather than violent conquerors. These new Gek grew to worship the Atlas, much like the Korvax did. And as this merchant class grew in power, they began to rebel against the original First Spawn, who could no longer replenish their numbers. Combine this with the return of the Sentinels, who also had a bone to pick with the First Spawn, and they were soon erased from the galaxy. Supposedly, but that's a thought for another time. Today, the First Spawn are pretty much just history. Contemporary Gek culture is focused on commerce and trade, rather than war and conquest. Gek First Spawn relics are pretty taboo and illegal in most places. So while today, most Gek are content to build vast trade empires, there are those who still venerate the old ways. One such cult is known as the Gek Last Spawn. The Last Spawn are unique for their beliefs regarding travelers. You see, not only do they have a penchant for violence, similar to the First Spawn, but they also seem obsessed with hunting travelers in order to harvest their souls. Take this transmission, for example. It was sent to the Trade Federation from a Gek who was investigating this cult. Pursued red robes into the tunnels. For a while, there are no words in the audio file, only sounds from beneath the planet's surface. Strange scratching noises echo in the darkness. Cries of pain issue from a familiar voice. Cultists are captured traveler, demanded hidden spirit, denied everything. The final transmission is clear and undistorted. I hear its words. You send Gek upon Gek. You consider us criminals, born in a brutal time. But the robes of the Last Spawn are not made of blood. They are made of souls. They remind us of who we once were, who we could be again. If that weren't disturbing enough, in another 2020 weekend mission, we learned of the traveler Narcissus, ally of the Last Spawn. Nothing more is known of this traveler, but it can be assumed that they've probably helped the Last Spawn locate souls on, quote-unquote souls, on more than one occasion. Be safe out there, travelers. It's a messed up universe. But that's it for my list of known cults in No Man's Sky. Which one did you find the most fascinating? Do you think we'll see a greater threat from the Last Spawn in the future? Did you sing with the voice of freedom? Is there a cult that I neglected to mention? It's a big universe with more lore than I can keep in my head, so it's totally possible that you've come across different occult activities on your travels. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if you love lore videos like this, be sure to leave a like. I previously did a video on some of the creepiest fates in No Man's Sky, so feel free to check that out if you haven't already. And let me know what areas of No Man's Sky lore you'd like me to explore next. The topic's so vast that even being as specific as just looking at cults, as you can see, it filled an entire video. so the more specific, the better. Also, if you've watched this far, you might enjoy being one of my first 10,000 subscribers. I make videos focused on all kinds of little details in games, highlighting the interesting and the overlooked. I know I'd be happy to have you. One last thing before I go. Jeff Keighley just announced that they're opening up nominations for the 2022 Game Awards Future Class. It's a program that annually recognizes 50 individuals who represent the future of games. If you think I fit on that list, I'll leave a link to my website below with more info and how to nominate me. Being a part of the Future Class has been a dream of mine since it first started, but for the first time, I think I might actually have a chance this year. But hey, I'll do a full video on that next week. Don't worry, I'll still do my No Man's Sky video, but as a bonus, I'll do a full video on it next week, sort of asking for your support, so feel free to wait until that. I was just too excited not to share it right now, but alright, I've got to go. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!